I am doing a documentary over women's rights in China during the Ming Dynasty. Starting off with how women were according to religion. In Taoism, there was the belief that nature equals women because they were the mother to all things. It is also believed that women should be respected, admired, and worshipped, for they are everyone's mother. And they are appreciated for their beauty of their body and regarded as sacred. Women, according to Confucianism, Yang Chen wrote that if women were given work outside the home, the sun and the moon, which is the emperor and the empress, would fade away. This type of myth would impact and shape the ideas of men and women in this time period in the favor of men. This holds the greatest function of women is to carry on the family line. Next is the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Women were required to abide by the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. The obediences being to obey her father before marriage, obey her husband during marriage, and to obey her sons after she has been widowed. 4 virtues were fidelity, physical charm, propriety in speech, and efficiency in needlework. They must comply or risk being divorced, even if by accident. A Chinese proverb states that beautiful woman is the origin of disaster, even though one of the 4 virtues is to have physical charm. Pan Zhao said that a woman does not need to be beautiful, intelligent, or talkative, but to be like a shadow and an echo is to be admired. This counteracts the 4 virtues. Women's position in the family is next. They were seen as a tool to continue the family line. They had no right to inherit family property. Childcare and taking care of the home was all that women were supposed to do during the day. Loyalty to her husband was an important aspect of a woman's worth. After marriage, a woman did not have status within the family until she had a son. No matter how well a woman did at everything else, as long as she did not bear a son, she would lose favor and be humiliated. She would be blamed for failing to carry on the family name. Humiliation could be simply discarded, sold to brothels as prostitutes, or to rich families as maids. When a wife lost her husband's favor, she would spend the rest of her life in loneliness and misery, and she would be fighting with her husband's other wives for his favor, and that of her parents-in-laws, or she would simply kill herself. Next is women's position in society. Women's position in society depends highly on the position of her husband. Women were regarded as menial entities, continually demoralized, degraded, humiliated, and ignored. Women could not get paid work in society. It was believed that if women worked outside the home, it was an ominous sign that would bring shame and disaster to the dynasty. The government would offer a woman who died of her chastity, a woman who committed suicide, so that she would have no other intercourse other than with her husband, an honorific arch or a title from the court. The ideal would have been set up, and to not meet this ideal would cast one as a failure, at least when it came to their gender identity. Silence was second nature, and women simply accepted mistreatment because they did not know anything different. Mary H. Fong wrote that Chinese women in paintings should be portrayed as beautiful but submissive, demure and amiable, unassertive and pleasant, agreeable and good-natured. Women are seen in paintings produced by men as they acted according to the male's rules. Marriage traditions in Ming China. The Ji ceremony was a celebration that took place when a girl was 15. This marked proper age of marriage readiness. The appropriate age for marriage should be no later than 30, and preferably between 22 and 27. A Chinese proverb said that only 2 doors of the same size can match with each other. This often means that only 2 people who have the same material condition can get married. Although women in this dynasty were allowed to remarry after their husband's death, they preferred to choose suicide to show their integrity to their husbands and families. The widow's death for honor was highly praised, bringing honor not only to her husband's family, but also to her family and the whole village. It was common practice for women to commit suicide after the death of their husbands. Concubines were women who were married to men as secondary wives, whose sole purpose was to produce sons for their husbands, though they were not classified as prostitutes. They were often sold by their parents either to brokers, which were merchants, or to the intended master to acquire money because of their poverty. Buying women as concubines was appropriate and acceptable behavior in China during the Ming Dynasty because they believed in polygamy, the practice of marrying multiple spouses. Concubines were accumulated by men of power to show their status within society and their political power. And men could afford many wives and should increase the amount of children born into their bloodline. A first wife may encourage her husband to buy concubines if she is unable to have children. When the concubine gives birth, the first wife would want to adopt the child and raise it as her own. A concubine was never able to become the first wife of her master, even if the primary wife had died. A concubine had no power or status in her life, but she was taken care of financially, which was a relief for most, considering the poverty that they were born into. This painting is by Tang Yin, known as Concubines of Last Emperor Chu, or Ladies in Royal Court. It illustrates women with little individuality. The two facing outward have the same facial features and expression. Socializing with each other indicates that they have the same husband. In looking at their hairpins, a woman's social status is determined by the patterns, materials, craftsmanship, and the number of hairpins in her hair. The women were wearing the G-style hairpins, which shows they belong to a wealthy man because they flaunt elaborate flowers. Finally, I will go over the ideal beauty type of a wife. First off, we start with foot binding, which was the process of pulling the toes back, thereby breaking the toes, with the exception of the big toe, then tightly wrapping her toes underneath the bottom of her foot. This would make sure that the girl's feet would not grow to be too big. It was exceedingly popular during the Ming Dynasty. The ideal size of an adult woman's feet was 3 inches long. However, if curvature existed on the bottom of the foot, it increased the sexual desirability. Compared to modern times, where an adult woman's foot is approximately 8 to 9 inches long. Men found foot binding sexually arousing and believed it signified a woman's beauty and gender. It was also an object of foreplay before intercourse. Men saw them as sex objects to satisfy certain perverted erotic fantasies. The man would gawk at her feet and then fondle them to become aroused. A husband could deny a girl whose feet were too long. It was acceptable for the man to end all connections if he was displeased. These women didn't see themselves as victims, but felt lucky that this pain that they had suffered would bring them to their futures. Little is known about the motivation or attraction of foot binding. In this painting by Kie Ying, The Spring Morning in the Han Palace, or Spring Dawn at the Palaces of the Han, the women in the front and the women climbing the staircase are prime examples of what foot binding does to the way a female walks. They have been hobbled, which has caused them to be physically unstable. Their lack of balance, caused by the 3-inch-long feet, is the source of their hunched posture. Nonetheless, this was seen as attractive. This made walking painful and was only done out of necessity. The ideal beauty of a woman's face. The lips, eyes, and eyebrows are revered in rating a woman's beauty. The lips were deemed best if they were rosy, small, and softly turned upwards. The eyes, dark black pupils, and a long, tenderly upcurved eyelid. A model eyebrow was thin, barely curved, and long. A woman's eyebrows were her sexiest attribute, according to men. Thank you for your time, patience, and sitting in to learn about women's rights and marriage in China during the Ming Dynasty.